I want to note that not all people on the right are saying to defund the FBI. Not everybody on the right is saying that. Some people are, yeah. Do you blame them? For real. I mean, if you're going to compare the egregious actions of abuse, I mean, I'm sure that if you wanted to adjust for population and size, the federal abuses seem pretty bad, guys. They seem really bad. And you have the increased spending on them even more so than local law enforcement. I'm going to get into all of that. Here's one of the big problems, though, I will say. And I was trying to figure out how to get around this. When you're talking about defunding the FBI, now let's just entertain this for a minute. I just discuss all things. The problem, one of the biggest issues, is jurisdiction. I mean, in my opinion. How do you get around the issue of jurisdiction without a federal agency? I'm not saying that in support of the federal agency. I'm saying that there are certain things that rise to something that the FBI manages. But there is an issue of jurisdiction as it relates to state and local law enforcement. Like, you can't have Illinois police investigating something going on in Missouri, right? You can't have Oklahoma police investigating something that's going on here in Texas. There's different, they have different areas of jurisdiction. So I do have a question on even how that would go. But you know where we need to start with the whole conversation as it relates to the FBI is the expense that is spent and the disproportionate expense, I might add, of spending as it is with federal and state and local. This is a big problem, and there's not, as you would imagine, there is not a whole heck of a lot of accountability there also. Believe it or not. I mean, we have had, I think our federal spending for federal law enforcement is like quadruple that what we are doing in terms of grants for state and local. I started actually reading about this when I was looking at how you could feasibly establish a grant. And this was when I started looking into this when you had all of the senators who were arguing. You had Cornyn who was leading it with the gun control stuff, right? So there were a lot of them. They were arguing back and forth about red flag law, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that came up was the Justice and Policing Act. And there's a lot of money that goes through this. There are grants that are established and things that help with, and I think we talked about it at the time, that help with certain state and local law enforcement. There are other grants that you have. You have the Justice and Policing Act. That was 2021. You have a couple of others too, including the grant program that was established through the DOJ. And that's where Cornyn and I think others were suggesting to have federal funds be given through that to state and local police for grants for school resource officers, et cetera. And of course, those programs do a lot more. They essentially help bolster state and local enforcement. And they allow departments to figure out how they're best going to do this. I mean, I understand all this stuff. I get it. But, I mean, I think that there is a really good question to ask about spending, why you have to have, I mean, really, I think I want to get into this a little bit more without going so far into the weeds. But there are some really good questions to ask, like, why is it that we're spending so much? I mean, for a percentage of GDP, it's been increasing the past 20 years. I mean, while the left was sitting here talking about defunding the police, it was funny because they didn't note the funding for police actually at the federal level is what's crazy. But yet, you know who gets like some of the least amount of it, particularly lately, is Customs and Border Patrol, which is so fascinating to me. That's where you actually need it the most. I mean, you've averaged about 0.26% of the GDP over the past decade, federal spending, and we're looking at like federal enforcement. So the Justice and Policing Act expanded the role of the federal government and expanded police spending by, it's by up to like $900 million. See? We're going to get into all of this and more because these are all things that when people are talking about defunding the FBI or restructuring, or there's like a ton of different ways to do this. This is what the left is seizing on to try to bring the right down, try to bring Republicans down to Democrats' level by saying, look, we said defund the police. You're saying defund the FBI. It all comes down in the wash, right? It's not the same thing. And not everybody on the right is saying it. And, I'm looking at it strictly logically. Can it even be done?